Welcome to Tycoons of Small Biz, a podcast where small business owners are celebrated as the backbone of the American economy. Each week, we introduce you to tycoons who share their stories and advice so that small business owners may learn from their experiences. Tycoons is powered by Backbone Planning Partners, FinTrepid Solutions, and Pivotal Advisors. Join us now as our hosts connect you to today's tycoons.
Good afternoon, Tycoons, and welcome to this episode of Tycoons of Small Biz. You are stuck with your host, Landon, today because Austin is in Austin. Yes, he is in Austin, Texas, starting to do some planning for a committee that he's on for an event that is happening in 11 months. So why that is happening, I'm not sure, but I think they're trying to be really proactive. So, hey, glad that you're with us today. This is your first time joining Tycoons of Small Biz. We are a podcast for small business owners by small business owners. Austin and I both come from long lines of entrepreneurs, great grandparents, grandparents, parents, siblings. So we live and breathe entrepreneurship. We love it. And that's why we started Tycoons, to give a platform to Main Street businesses to come on and tell their individual and their professional journeys, and for us to understand how those are intertwined, to hear about successes and failures and everything in between. And I assure you, today's conversation will be an absolute pleasure and a delight. Her story is super unique and interesting, and how she came about into the role that she's in now is it's probably nothing you've ever heard before. So we're super excited to have Tiffany Stovall on the show. She is the CEO and the president of Kansas Manufacturing Solutions, and essentially what they do is they help Kansas manufacturers work smarter, compete, and prosper. That's essentially why they exist. So Tiffany, welcome to Tycoons of Small Biz.
Thanks, Landon. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yep, you are so welcome. And just before we jump into any of the business stuff, Tiffany, you know, we had an opportunity to chat with you for 10 or 15 minutes, what feels like forever ago. You know, it was probably 3 months ago, because right now we usually book about 2 to 3 months out for the show. So during our pre-qualification call, we had an opportunity to chat with you, get to know you a bit. And you told us a little bit about your family, but rather than me try to rehash that, please spend a couple minutes, Tiffany. Tell us anything about your personal life, your upbringing, your family, your education, anything that is important to you. We'd love to just get a little bit of insight into Tiffany's background.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, what an open-ended question, because we all like to think that we are like these super complex people, right? And I'm just a normal girl from the Midwest. I grew up born and raised in Kansas City on the Missouri side. So go Chiefs, go Royals. But because on the Kansas side, we're all smushed together, it just kind of is all the same for everyone else in the world, except for if you live in Kansas City. You have to make the distinction between Missouri and Kansas. There is a street called State Line, and on one side you are in Missouri, the other side you are very distinctly in Kansas. So that's just for those that are in the know and that care. So about me, gosh, I serve Kansas companies right now, but I was born and raised in Missouri. I went to the University of Missouri, go Tigers. And that was a very interesting thing, coming to work on the Kansas side, because every company I would go sit in front of, there was always a K-State banner in the background, or a University of Kansas in the banner in the background. And the first thing that they all ask is, what school did you go to? And they're looking for that you went to one of those big two, even though we've got more, we've got Wichita State University, Pittsburgh State University, Emporia State, but they're looking for the right answer is one of those, right? And so I'd say, I went to Mizzou, go Tigers, and they're like ready to throw me out of the office. But I'm a proud Missouri graduate and moved to Charlotte, North Carolina for a little bit and came back to Kansas City after my son was born. So I have a son named Timothy, my husband, Tim. So it's Tiff and the two Tims is how we're known, is that we would go somewhere and it's like Tiff and the Tims. I actually even tried to start a blog at one point after my son was first born called My Two Tims or something like that, because the most ridiculous stuff happens when you have a toddler. He's 15 now, so he's not that. But I distinctly remember a time where I caught my son, he was probably 4 at the time, trying to jump into his pants. Have you ever seen a child try to jump 2 feet at a time into their pants? And he was so heavy at this. I was in the other room and I heard ka-thump, ka-thump, darn it, ka-thump. And so I'm going, so I go and I just stand in the door and watch him, and he's busy at this for 15 minutes. So finally I said, where did you get this? What are you doing? I'm trying to jump in my pants. Why? Because that would be cool if I could jump into my pants. Where did you get this from? About this point, his dad walks up behind me. Big Tim. So we've got little Timmy and Big Tim. So Big Tim walks up behind me and I said, do you see what this kid's doing? He's trying to jump in his pants. And he was like, oh yeah, we practiced that the other day. That's where it came from. It came from his dad they thought they could jump in their pants. So I on one side of me, it's, very, very business and running a company and blah, blah, blah. The other side, I have, 2 Tims trying to jump into their pants all the time. So life is fun. And I think that is anyone that knows me knows that, don't take things too seriously. And that is because this is the kind of thing I have going on in my background, which is, trying to jump in our pants. And I would not doubt that that's something that has been tried within the last 12 months. So,
yeah. Well, what if I told you that I haven't seen one kid do it, but I've seen 2 do it at the same time? No, not really, but I've got 2.5-year-old twins, so.
Nice.
Yeah. So, doing all kinds of stuff like that, stuff that I just never would have in a million years actually seen, people actually try to do,
I'm sure you have lots of good stories, Landon.
Oh man. Yeah. Yeah. Last night we were playing in, we were just kind of sitting in the living room and they were playing in the hallway, kind of in the walkway of our house, the walkway from the front door in the living room. And one of our neighbors had come over and dropped off this Barbie bus. Okay. And, it's like the size of like a small, like gym bag, something like that. And my son is sitting on top of it, and the hole to climb down into the driver's seat, it's like 6 inches long by, 3 inches wide. And he's like telling me he wants to climb in there so that he can drive this thing, and I'm like, buddy, the steering wheel is like the size of your fingernail. Like, I don't think you could drive that thing. So yeah, they keep us on our toes.
That's good.
All day, every single day. So
good.
Yeah. Now, if I recall, I think you said, so I'm assuming your son is either a freshman or a sophomore.
Yes.
And I think he's a football player, right?
He is. He's a football player. They've just finished football season. So they didn't last year, his team, they made it to state. Actually, they won state, which was a kind of a big deal. This year, they didn't even make it through the playoffs. So he's wrestling now. So let me tell you about wrestling. He's not a wrestler. He has not wrestled before, but he's on the D line with football. And his coach said, you should do wrestling. Just it'll help you out. It'll keep you active, all that kind of thing. We did try to do wrestling once before. He was in the 7th grade, and it was the 3rd day of practice, and he tore like all the ligaments in his ankle during practice. So I get this call from the front office that he had hurt himself. And so you can't see me, but I'm tall. I'm 6 foot tall. Big Tim is like 6'3". And so my 7th grader was also tall. He was just a really big kid. And his coach was probably 5'6", 5'7", kind of a small guy, but had carried this kid from the basement of the school over his shoulder up the stairs. So at that time, Timmy was probably 5'8", 5'9", and 200 plus pounds. He was over 200 pounds. He was a big kid at that point. He's now 6'3", 170. So he had that growth spurt at 6'4", so he had that growth spurt and lost a bunch of weight, but he was still in this place, right? So I hear that this coach has like thrown him over his shoulder and run down the hallway, and I'm just like, slow clap for the coach because he got him there. And when I get to the school, they're at the front door, and he's sitting in an office chair, and the secretary, God love her, she's like rolling him out in not a wheelchair, but a chair with wheels on the bottom of like an office chair. And so I'm asking and he was out. He played basketball too at the time, but he was out he was done for maybe 3 months. And so that was his experience with wrestling. And I was like, so I guess we don't wrestle. And he's like, no, I'm done with wrestling. So now he's wrestling again. Football season's over. He had a great season. They had a great season, but so he's now wrestling. And okay. I'm waiting. I'm just hoping, we don't break bones in this family, but we tear ligaments. We've got all these, muscle and ligament issues. So I'm just, oh gosh, every day crossing all the fingers that there's nothing strange that happens, just because I'm still shell shocked by that.
Right. It sounds like a bit of a tale of an entrepreneur where, you make state one year, and then the next year you don't even make the playoffs, and
yes,
then you try something else, and you tear something, and then you're knocked down, and then you get back up, and
yes.
So very cool. All right, well, you tell him that we're rooting for him, and
I will do that.
So you've got a really cool story. I just remember getting off the call with you, and Austin and I chatted for a second. I'm like, what a freaking cool story. Like, how many people will you meet in your life that have the story that you have, to where, I don't want to give anything away because I want you to tell it, but where you started out doing what you were doing and end up in the position that you are in now. So give us the backstory to how you got to, where you are today.
Oh my gosh, I would love to, because still there's some days that I go, how did I get here? So I mentioned earlier that we moved back here from North Carolina after my son was born. So we moved back in 2007. And I stayed home for a little while, for a few months. And then I got a job with a company called Tetra Tech. They're a large international environmental services firm. The gentleman that hired me, I was hired to be a project manager in the energy efficiency team that they were building. Well, this was 2007, 2008. We all know what happened to the economy around that time, is that it just fell down. And this division of Tetra Tech at the time, it was pre-construction. So it was pre-construction, but then they also had the energy management division within there. So I was the first hire of what was going to be a team of 12. And after I was hired, the guy, and his name is Gary. Gary looks at me and he says, well, they shut down hiring, so it's going to be you and me, kid. And he said kid because I was a kid at the time, essentially, compared to what I am now. And he was very tenured in his career, an industrial energy management engineer. And so I said, okay, what does that mean? And he said, well, we do energy audits. And so you're going to have to learn how to do this, or you're at least going to have to come out and be hands-on with me. Great. Our first project, we did an energy study of a newspaper building. And we had, so if you're not familiar with energy management, you're looking at all the ways in a facility to save on energy costs, whether it's electricity, gas, water, and many times you're looking at the actual unit itself. And so most of the time that, air conditioner units are on the rooftop, so they call them rooftop units. A lot of times there's a way to get to the rooftop unit from inside the building. On this building, it was a 2-story building. I'll never forget it. It was a 2-story building. We had to, there was a ladder built into the side of the building, and you have to scale the side of the building and get up and over to get onto the roof. And so we had also just brought in an intern. An intern was assigned to us at the same time, who was still in college. And so Gary looks at me and he's like, okay, we're going up there. And I was like, who's going up there? He says, we're going up there. And I said, I don't climb the side buildings. I'm sorry. And also happened to be a super windy day. It was actually like historically windy on that day. He was like, look, this is what we do. If you're not able to do this, it's fine. Well, that was like a challenge for me, because you're telling me I can't do this. So I climbed up the side of this building. Climbing up the side of a building isn't so hard, even when you're afraid of heights. Did I mention that part? It's the putting your foot over the side of the ladder, getting onto the roof. And so I made it through that. Then you have to also put that same leg over the side of the building and then scale down the side. I literally thought I thought I was dying. I thought I was going to die. The wind is blowing. I am unsteady. My nerves are crazy. So energy management. This is where I started out, at least in this line. And as time went on, he also taught classes for the Certified Energy Manager, CEM, okay? And I'd go along with him, or he wanted me to go along with him. I shouldn't say I would. This is the first time, and he needed me to be there to sort of help with the class logistically. And I said, well, you know what? If I'm gonna be doing this, I should probably take this. I should probably participate in the class and take the test. And he looks at me and he kind of, pats my hand in a very fatherly kind of way. We're still really good friends to this day. But he's like, oh, no. Engineers even don't pass this on the first time. So again, remember, challenge. Oh, I can't do this? Okay. So it's a week-long class. You take a test at the end of it. And he's like, you know what? He keeps telling me, it's okay when you don't pass it. It's okay, because lots of people don't pass this the first time. So we get through and I pass the CEM. So long story shorter, we ended up doing work for the company I'm currently with. So our name is now KMS, Kansas Manufacturing Solutions. At the time, we were MAMTech, Mid-America Manufacturing Technology Center. And they hired us as a company to go in and do certified energy audits, to do energy audits for industrial clients. By the way, I did pass the test on the first time, and I got my CEM certification like right away. So here we are, and now we're doing energy audits for industrial clients. We were doing so much work, and about that office decided, they were going to shut down. It's pre-construction, and there was no construction happening by now, which is 2009. So they brought us in-house. I initially came, so Gary, who was my boss, he went in first, and he quickly found himself overwhelmed. And so I was still at Tetra Tech at the time, had found my way on other things, and they called and said, hey, can you come in just kind of on a contract basis? And so I did for a short term. And when I arrived, there was like a stack of projects, just, here, take this. 3 months into that, I was offered a full-time role with this company. And I took it knowing that my future at that company was kind of unsure with all the layoffs that were happening. So I took it, I came in, and literally 2 months after that, there was word that layoff was happening in our own company, in our own organization. And usually like last in, first out, right? So I just started to hustle. literally, what can I do? What needs to be done? And just took that approach because I wanted to stay. It worked out really, really well. It was close to my son's daycare. It was just, it checked all the boxes. And so I just hustled. And so I obviously made it through the layoff, which was in some ways kind of uncomfortable for me, knowing that I was the last person in and everybody expected I would be a part of that, and I wasn't. So that was a little bit uncomfortable. But what came out of that is that trying to build and grow out our energy management practice within the organization. I did that through partnerships. So I started to develop partnerships with local utilities, with anyone that I possibly could. And finally, I did enough of that where the CEO at the time said, you know what, why don't you just do this? And so they created a role for me called VP of Partnerships. And so I was still doing energy work, and then had this VP of Partnership role, which was all encompassing. And I continued to hustle. And all the time, we were getting some state funds when I was first brought in. That went away. So again, another round of layoffs, and I just kept up the hustle. It was really more about self-preservation, but also just trying to just keep moving things forward. And the more you hustle, we know how, especially with entrepreneurs, and small businesses, the more you hustle, the more you get. The more you hustle, the more there is to do, kind of thing. And so it was one of those situations. And so now by 2017, when my boss at the time, who I still adore, he's one of my favorite people, those people that I've worked for. So this is now Mark and Gary before that, which those two are two of my favorites still. He decided to leave and I was put into this role. So, I mean, it was just really kind of crazy. It was just like, keep doing more, keep your job. And the more I did, the more was given to me. But also it was this attitude of, it doesn't matter what it takes. It doesn't matter what it takes. I think, I know, I remember going into my boss, so I'm a VP at the time. And I went into our CEO and I said, it doesn't matter what we need. Even if it means taking out the trash, because we were looking around literally at all of our resources and what did we need, what did we not need? And so I just knew that there was gaps. And so I said, I don't care what the gaps are. It doesn't matter to me about title or anything like that. Whatever needs to be done, I'll do it. And so I think it was that sense, not just hustle, but like, because that's bigger than just myself, right? There were times that I was overextended, but really it was about, how do I keep things moving forward in this company? And what can I do to help that? And there was no sense of, well, that's not my job. I don't know who's going to do that now. And so it was from the beginning, it was a bit of that. And here I am. And it's when he left late 2017, I was appointed as CEO at that point. So this is a story of hustle. It really just is a story of hustle.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, Kansas Manufacturing Solutions, I'll just refer to it as KMS from here on out, if that's okay.
Yep.
So is KMS structured as a normal for-profit business, or do you guys have some kind of special structure? Like, you're not a nonprofit or something, are you?
That's a great question. We actually are a nonprofit. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. So we are a consulting organization that also holds a contract with the with NIST MEP, so National Institute of Standards and Technology Manufacturing Extension Partnership. So there's one of us, an organization like ours, in every state plus Puerto Rico. So there's 51 centers across the country. And the purpose of that contract is to help manufacturers in our states be competitive, to help them grow. And the purpose of this organization, NIST MEP, NIST, if you're not familiar with NIST, it's an extraordinary organization. They've got all sorts of labs. Did you ever think about who sets time? Who decides when what time it actually is. That comes out of NIST and the NIST labs. And so this organization was built in order to get some of the research and all of the cool scientific innovations that were coming out of the NIST labs, whether in plastics and polymers and robotics and automation, to get those into industry to commercialize, right? So that was the purpose of putting this together, putting the organization together. NIST sits right under the US Department of Commerce. And so the whole purpose was to find organizations like ours in every state that could take forward that mission. Initially, it was all about commercializing new technologies, but then really early on, what we found with small, and particularly with small to medium-sized manufacturers, but we found early on, and this is back in, so we got our contract back in 1991. And what we found early on is that small to medium-sized manufacturers weren't, while they were eager to get those new technologies and to commercialize them, they weren't necessarily ready for it. They still needed to put their own processes in place to help them be more efficient, and help them be better at what they were already doing, so that we could get them running like really strong machines before we added new technologies and new commercialization. So really quickly, almost all of us as centers ended up doing more of that efficiency work and helping companies just really set the stage to be ready for new technologies. And so that was 91, and now here we are 2022, and we're finding that companies just now are really, really ready for some of the more advanced technologies and advanced materials and things like that.
Ooh, what a perfect place to take a dramatic pause here. We'll hear a quick call to action, and when we come back, in our day job, Tiffany, we serve quite a few small to medium-sized manufacturers, and I am very fascinated by manufacturing, probably because I know absolutely nothing about it. Now, I did take I went through a certification earlier this year. It was I wonder if it's the same group that does what you do in the state of Nevada, because they're essentially the manufacturing resource I believe, for the state. So maybe they do what you do out there, and they put a workshop on lean manufacturing.
Yes. I bet that was our group. I bet that was the Nevada ME Manufacturing Extension Partnership.
Yeah, I bet you're right. And I remember when I went to this, and I actually invited a couple of our clients to come. So we're sitting there kicking the day off, and everybody's introducing themselves, right? Hey, I'm Sally with SVP manufacturing. Hey, I'm Bob with this or that. And then it comes to me, and I'm like, oh, I'm Landon with Backbone Planning Partners, and they're like, who the heck are you? And what are you? She's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, fair question. I'm like, we have a lot of manufacturing clients, and if I can pull a couple of good nuggets out of your workshop today and pass them on to my clients, and there's some value in that. And so that was kind of my first real exposure to the manufacturing process, because like I said, I've never worked in manufacturing. I've got zero experience. I can barely hang a picture on the wall, let alone engineer or manufacture something. So but it was super interesting. So when we come back from this quick break, I want to hear all about, what does manufacturing look like, out there, and, what are some of the things that you're advising your clients on, who I assume are, all the small and medium-sized manufacturers. So we want to pull all this great info out of your head so that we can share it with our listeners. But before we do that, we'll just take a real quick break here.
Hey there, Tycoons. Austin Peterson here, co-host of Tycoons of Small Biz. If you think you have what it takes to be considered a tycoon and you're wondering how you could become a featured guest, please follow and then message us at Tycoons of Small Biz on LinkedIn. We'd love to have a conversation with you to see if it is a mutually good fit, and if so, we'll get you scheduled for an interview. If you're unsure about being a guest on our podcast, but are contemplating selling your business over the next few years and you'd like to know what your business is worth, please also follow us and then message us on LinkedIn for your no obligation, informal valuation of your business. We look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for listening to the Tycoons of Small Biz podcast. And now, back to today's program.
All right, welcome back, Tycoons. We are here with Tiffany Stovall, and we are talking all things manufacturing. And so I want to serve it right back over to Tiffany. And Tiffany, tell us a little bit about what's the manufacturing world? What's the landscape look like out in Kansas? And then I know that's going to lead to a really, productive conversation around, what are manufacturers doing right now to pivot and innovate and excel? So go ahead.
Yep, happy to do that. So people think of Kansas as agriculture, as a farm state. Even here in Kansas, we talk about ourselves as a farm state, but really, in terms of receipts, there's $17.5 billion in annual farm and ranch cash receipts. Manufacturing in Kansas generates almost $28 billion a year, so more than half again of farm sales. So 17.5 billion versus almost $28 billion a year. We export just a little over $8 billion a year worth of manufactured goods to other countries, and it accounts for about 15.5% of the total output in the state, employing about 12% of the workforce. So, when we talk about manufacturing, we're not just talking about this small subset of companies, but manufacturing is something that's so critical and so important to all of us. And I will also say that in Kansas, most 98.5% of manufacturers are considered small to medium-sized companies. Most of them on what we would all consider more on the smaller side of 100 and under employees. Most of those are 100 and under employees, and quite a few of those are even 50 and under. And that's, we're just a snapshot of what happens nationally. So what we hear about are the big brands, right? We hear about the big manufacturers, Frito-Lay and the car manufacturers, and Caterpillar. We hear about these big manufacturers that are attached to brands that we are familiar with. But what we don't talk about is the supply chain that supplies those manufacturers, as well as all the other goods that we consume. But one of the things that the pandemic really did for us, nationally and here in the state, is it put a magnifying glass on manufacturing, right? When we were suddenly talking about shortages in PPE, we were suddenly talking about shortages at the grocery store, whether it was toilet paper or bread. These are all things that are manufactured here in the United States. What we really kept talking about, and we is also absolutely a challenge, are the parts of our supply chain that come from overseas, right? And we've all seen the pictures on social media of the big barges sitting in the ports, right, waiting, and even the little things that here's my bed that I ordered 3 months ago. It's right there, the picture of the port. But that is true too. And so while our organization nationally exists to help United States manufacturers and to help not just help them grow, but also we talk about reshoring, how to bring back manufacturing, how to strengthen our own manufacturing communities so that we can meet the needs. And one of the things that we really found is that a lot of the stuff that we are purchasing from overseas, because we think it's cheaper, And we think that that's the best way to do it. And I'm talking to small to medium-sized companies here, because especially these companies are thinking about, how can I save $1? And we have this thought that it's cheaper if it's made in China or Vietnam or somewhere overseas. But what we found very, very, very intimately is that when there is any sort of delay, that the delays in those products that are made overseas that don't come on time. I can't tell you how many stories we have where we matched manufacturers. They were waiting for something overseas that they weren't going to get for months, if even that. And we did the search in state and found, in one case, there was a manufacturer less than 30 minutes down the road that was making what a company needed. They had never looked. They had never thought about it, never looked, because they just thought, I have to go overseas to make this thing. And so, we not only talk about a savings and shipping, but we're talking about the savings and, the opportunity cost and what it costs when you can't, the true cost of not being able to meet the orders of your clients, whoever your clients are. So, manufacturing in Kansas, I just talked a little bit about what it looks like, but what's happening here in Kansas is a snapshot of what's happening across the country as well, in terms of what it looks like, who really runs manufacturing. Yes, these big companies provide a lot of jobs, and I won't take that back. A lot of jobs. They're critical parts of the supply chain, these tier one suppliers, the OEMs, but it's these small manufacturers that really run American manufacturing, and that can't be overstated. How important small to medium-sized companies are to our economy, to job creation, to making sure that we can get what we need when we need it, that kind of a thing. So, again, that's something that's not just Kansas, that's across the country.
Yeah. Would you say that's kind of the biggest challenge that you're seeing with your local manufacturers is the supply chain stuff? And maybe speak to maybe one or two other ones that are pretty relevant, because I'm sure that if they're relevant to you guys, they're probably relevant to the rest of us in other states.
Absolutely. So supply chain is one of those issues. Especially 2 years ago, that's all we heard about, right? Was the supply chain issues. That's starting to level out now. We do an annual survey of our manufacturers, like many states do. So, and I'll just do an MEP plug here, that if you're not connected with the MEP in your state, and we're not all named the same thing, so just look up your state manufacturing extension partnership. And that's the go-to in your state. If you didn't get that, feel free to reach out to me. I'll connect you to the right person. But and so many of them do a survey the same as we do. So we do an annual survey of manufacturers in our states, really trying to understand what their challenges are, how we can help them, what do they need from us, what do they need from resources, whether it's us or somebody else, and what are they facing. So we heard supply chain. Another thing that comes up in almost every meeting is, and on the survey, was people. I need people. So we hear that a lot, and we're all trying to do it to address this in different ways. Manufacturing Day is the first Friday of October, where manufacturers across the country open up their doors and many times host tours and things like that. We're all doing things, we're all doing that kind of effort. But really, it's a much bigger challenge. We've got folks that are retiring from skilled trades to include manufacturing, but we don't have the pipeline of future talent to come in and take those roles. And part of it is an image issue. We think manufacturing, and I say this a lot in presentations, that this old sort of thought about what manufacturing is, the old Laverne and Shirley, and we're just moving things from one place to another, and it's repetitive and it's dirty, and oh my gosh, there's no way I could ever do anything like that. Manufacturing doesn't look like that anymore. I've talked about how manufacturing, about the automation and digitization of manufacturing. Part of this is is to fill the workforce needs. That it's robots and cobots in many places that are providing assistance to some of that repetitive work. It's about the ergonomics, right? That you can't have a person that's bending over like this all day, every day. We just don't do that. We just don't do that anymore. We have better processes. We have better equipment. But what hasn't caught up is our mindset about what manufacturing trades, what manufacturing careers can look like for young people. We've all done a really good job of pressing young people towards a 4-year degree to college. And I don't even have to go too far into that to even think about how problematic that is, especially with the cost of college and the cost of, those degrees, what that looks like, when many times in these skilled trades with just a certification, we've got kids that are graduating from high school, starting into careers that are paying $60,000, $70,000 with no debt. There's also so many programs out there where with like an earn and learn, whether it's an apprenticeship or some other sort of local programs where manufacturers, because they're really looking for people, are parts of programs where, again, there's this earn and learn, and kids are able to get to work right away, making good money. These aren't old, dirty, repetitive jobs anymore. They're high skill, high tech sorts of jobs. So we have an image issue with manufacturing an image issue that leads to the people issue, to the people shortage. So, that is something that we hear at almost every company that we go sit down with, which is part of our process, is we go sit down with a company to really understand what their challenges are. And, we're not a hammer trying to hit a nail here. We're trying to really understand what their challenges are, and then fill the particular challenge that they may have. The challenge that they all have, among others, are finding people, finding potential workforce. So we hear that quite a bit. Business growth, that's another thing that we hear quite a bit from companies. So 61% of companies in the last year, or said that in the next 5 years, they will focus on increasing their market penetration with their current products. So meaning taking the same stuff they're making now and trying to enter new markets, but they're not quite sure how to do that. 49% of companies said that their business strategy would be to produce better quality products. Okay, that's great. But what does that mean? How do I do that? How do I measure that? So these are some examples of the work that we'll do with companies. And then as well, just finally here, this idea of again, I'm gonna bring it back to automation, which in our industry, we call it Industry 4.0. It's been talked about for years. And so with this is additive printing, which 3D printing, right? We talk about 3D printing. We talk about virtual reality, robots, cobots, and how does data enter into all of this so that we can do our jobs easier and faster, more efficient, with less people and less expense over time. So these are the challenges that manufacturers are facing. And you couldn't talk about Industry 4.0. You couldn't talk automation, digitization 5-10 years ago, because it was, oh gosh, we can't take the jobs from people. But now we don't have the people for the jobs. So it's opened up the conversation in an entirely different way, because now it's not viewed as taking jobs from people, which it wasn't back then, but you kind of hear that. Now it's about, how can we use technology to help fill the gaps where we don't have people? And so it's opened up a different kind of conversation now.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of things I want to mention. Nevada Industry Excellence.
Yes, that's our counterpart.
That's the group out here, and that's who hosted the Lean 101 workshop. So really, really enjoyed the lady who presented that. Learned a ton. So I think you and I have two very unique perspectives on this people thing. And I'll tell you what my perspective is. And then certainly the fact that you've got a 15-year-old gives you a unique perspective, because I think you could make the argument that these kids that are in high school right now, they are really this first generation of kids that, have had cell phones for, I'm not saying your kid, but I know,
Yes, my kid, yes.
yeah. So I'm also I teach a class at church, and I've got 10 and 11-year-old boys and girls. And, I would just argue that, these kids that are in high school right now are really this first generation to where they're having phones at super young ages. And the reason I bring this up and what that translates to is that I read a study the other day by a guy that studies habits in children. And he conducted a study, and the study was essentially, the findings were that it was like 7 or 8 out of 10 children, when asked what they want to do when they grow up, are saying YouTuber, influencer, social media star. Like 7 or 8 out of 10 kids are saying that.
Wow.
So
Wow.
my question is like, how do you work on a problem like that for manufacturing, where your backs are already kind of up against the wall from a people standpoint? And, not that all kids are going to, turn out to be social media stars, of course, but the fact that those are their aspirations tell us that, that manufacturing is probably going to have a pretty hard go at it when it comes to recruiting this generation of kids that are only 10 and 15, years old right now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if there's even an answer to this right now, but what are your thoughts on that? And how do you address that as being, potentially a very serious concern or issue for manufacturing in the next couple, decade or two?
So, it's a very interesting question, and it's something that we have to, there's no one solution. Okay. It has to be multi-pronged, and it has to include schools, it has to include education, it has to include industry. So I think the way that industry has, and this isn't just manufacturing, this is in healthcare and IT and all of these other industries as well. What we've been used to being able to do is, as the industry, sit back and say, we need this, we need these people, right? And that education, whether it was K through 12 or secondary education, would try to provide that. We've moved into a different phase now, because what you're talking about with kids that have this 70%, 7 out of 10 that want to be these YouTubers and influencers, it's because that's what they see. That's what they're exposed to. And so what we have to talk about is exposure. How do we expose kids, students, to opportunities that are available to them earlier and earlier? So several years ago, we were talking about getting into the high schools to talk manufacturing. And again, take this across other industries as well. How do we get into the high schools? Then it was, high school isn't early enough because they've already started to make their mind up. So we got to get down into the middle school. Then it was, now it's, we're talking elementary school and even preschool. Because when you start to expose kids early and often, which they get through these things, through these cell phones, often exposure early and often, that's what they see. They see these YouTubers making all this money and having fun doing it. And who wouldn't want to? I want to be an influencer. I'm just not willing to put in the time and exposure to social media to make that happen. But yeah, it looks great. It looks fun. But what they don't see is the back end, is what it actually takes to be that. And so when we can start to expose them to career pathways, just taking that model and exposing them to career pathways and what it actually looks like, not because we are grown people talking about it, because we think it's a good idea. That's not going to be enough. They're going to have to get into facilities, get into companies, see for themselves what it looks like, talk to people that are already in those jobs. And again, not old people like me, but younger people that they feel like they can relate to. I'm a mom. Does my son relate to me as mom? I'm mom, but is he going to think that something's cool because I say it's cool?
Mm-hmm.
No, he's not. He's going to think it's not cool if I say it's cool. So that's where we have to start, is getting into schools earlier in partnership with industry, whoever industry is. If you are an industry that needs people, you got to start talking to young kids now, finding ways, and think and trust me, the schools are hungry for it. They're hungry for volunteers. They're hungry for tours, and those kinds of things, because they also see a problem that they're trying to solve just from their side. And how would a teacher know what it's like to be in manufacturing? How would a teacher know what it's like to be in healthcare? How would a teacher know what it's like to be in IT or in some of these other categories without their own exposure? So we have to be willing to do differently. And then in the meantime, we try to find better ways. So some of the things that we talk to companies about, with the people issues, which again, they all have, is what are you doing to become a company of choice, an employer of choice? Because people do have choices. You need them. They don't necessarily need you because there's all these options now.
Right.
And so how do you become attractive in ways to go, that somebody's going to want to come and work for you? And so we're talking about things like company culture and how to build that and how to maintain that and how to become this employer of choice. And what are you doing on your side to attract and retain talent? So these are conversations that for a long time we didn't have to have because it was an employer's market. And now we have to have those conversations, and those companies that are really serious about it are doing lots of things in that area. And I'm not talking about ping pong tables and personal chefs. I'm talking about true company culture, and how do you build that? How do you maintain that? How do you nurture that? And so that this is a place where people actually want to come and work.
Right. Well, you may have just cracked the entire code, from A to Z, and maybe what that means is that as parents, and as older people talking to younger people, what we need to do is just tell them how uncool manufacturing is. And then they'll come to the realization themselves that it's actually really cool because we're telling them how uncool that it is.
You know what, Landon? High five on that, because I think that's exactly
you could do a whole marketing campaign around that, like uncool manufacturing,
I like it.
Well, all right. We're bumping up against time here. We just got a handful of minutes left, but in closing, maybe we just kind of finish out this thread here, which is like, this, people conversation. So,
Yeah.
Your son's 15, he's going to be doing whatever it is that he's going to be doing in the next couple of years. Maybe he's going to college, maybe he goes to a trade school, maybe he starts a business, maybe he, wants to work with mom or dad, and who knows what his path is. Mm-hmm. But what advice are you giving, Tim, or I don't know, Timmy, I think you referred to him as, what advice are you giving Timmy, and what advice are you giving young people right now that are just kind of getting started in their careers?
So I serve in a program where I'm mentoring young women, and have had an opportunity to do that for quite some time now. And you heard me allude to it earlier, or maybe I even said it earlier, and as I talked about what my path looked like. And for me, my words were something to the effect of I'll do anything. But I think really the approach to take is when we're early in our career is, how can I be helpful? To really try to understand what's happening in the business, and so that you feel that your role is more than just a cog in a wheel, right? I'm just doing a thing because my boss told me to, and I got to get it done by X date because my boss told me to, but really trying to understand what role you play in the organization. And this, coming to it with an attitude of, what can I do and how can I help move strategy? But that also, and so that's what I tell my son is, and what I'm trying to teach him, not just about what his future career will look like, but at home and with his grandparents. My mom has Alzheimer's, and we're all in new places and new phases all the time, right? Just trying to understand what that looks like. And so really just approaching every day, like, how can I be helpful? What can I do? So that's what I'm trying to teach him. This is what I mentor the young women that I was working with, to come to a new job, to come to situations with, what can I do to be helpful? But along with that, I will say that is also a responsibility for us as leaders. On how can I be helpful? And so if the expectation is that our young people are doing this, and if they come with this attitude of, what can I do and how can I be helpful? Then that means we need to be really very clear on what the company goals are, what the strategy is. And so when if someone were to come to you and ask that question, what would you say? And not just giving them tasks, but helping them understand the vision so that they know that the work that they do, and it also that, how it fits in, but it also empowers them to find other things to do that maybe you didn't tell them to do. Which is where I want my son to be, is that I don't want to have to tell you every single thing that needs to be done. Same thing with our workforce, that if we empower them by letting them see what the vision is and what the full strategy is. What are the goals for this month? What are the goals for this quarter, for this year? And if they understand that and how their work fits into that, then we're helping them to help drive us all forward, and it really makes the job easier for us. But that really requires us as leaders to have some clarity, not just have clarity for ourselves about that, or maybe on your leadership team, but have and create clarity for the entire organization of what that looks like.
Yeah, I love that. It made me think of a story I heard this morning driving to work. I was finishing up the last chapter of an audiobook. It's called Who Not How. It's by Dan Sullivan, who created The Strategic Coach, and then this he's an author and a speaker. They collaborated on this together. And one of the final stories in the book was about a company who they do janitorial work. Okay. And one of their clients is NASA. And a gentleman had gone in and interviewed one of the janitors for NASA, and he said, what do you do here? And he said, I'm helping, put men on the moon or something like that, or I'm helping put rockets in space. You know what I mean? Because his purpose was something of great importance, and that purpose was instilled in him by the company. They're a contractor, but I think he only worked, at NASA. And so, that purpose was instilled, and it was communicated, and it dripped down and touched every single person of the organization. And I thought that was really interesting. But just going back to your point about how we have a responsibility as leaders for people to be taught some of that stuff, because as entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs are definitely a different breed, because, at the end of the day, they're usually willing to do things that a lot of other people are just flat out not willing to do. Yeah. And that's what makes some people very successful as entrepreneurs. Yeah. But a lot of that's it's innate, right? Yeah. It's not that you were ever really taught that. That's just who you were. It was part of your upbringing. It was stuff that happened in your life. It was this, it was that, but you're never really taught that kind of stuff. So I love what you were explaining there, how you're actually trying to teach people that stuff, which is teaching people how to learn, how to go above and beyond to to grow and to excel and to be, to become great at what they're doing. So that is really cool. I've never really heard it kind of explained like that.
And Landon, I would add one more word to it: teach it, but also empower them. We empower the people that work with us and for us to be able to make those moves when we are clear on what our expectations are, by setting goals. What are our own goals, which helps them set their own goals, have the conversation often, and reevaluate, reassess. That really is the key. And the other thing, and I'll end on this because I know we're running short on time here, is that when we can do that as leaders, it helps us avoid burnout, because entrepreneurial types are also just used to doing it all. And when you get to a certain point where you can't, if you're going to do it all, you're only going to hit a certain level of growth. If you want to grow beyond your wildest imaginations, you're going to have to be able to let some of that go. You let some of that go by empowering the people that work with you and for you.
Yeah. Well said. I love that. Well, Tiffany, this has been a really wonderful conversation. You're so easy to talk to, and you've got such great knowledge to share with us. So thank you so much for joining us. If there's anybody that wants to track you down for whatever reason, connect with you, what's the best way for people to do that?
I'm on LinkedIn. So Tiffany Stovall, Tiffany Stovall, with Kansas Manufacturing Solutions.
All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing everything you've shared with us today. And we look forward to, tracking you as you continue to be successful and do great things for the manufacturers in Kansas. And I'm sure you've got input on some stuff nationwide as well. So thank you again for being here, and have a great day.
Thanks much. Thank you.
You've been listening to Tycoons of Small Biz, a podcast for small business owners by small business owners. Join us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Arizona time for an introduction to another great tycoon. And be sure to follow us on our social media channels for links to all of our episodes and great content.